All right, we are finishing up the regulation section of JTC 100. This is part 4, shouldn't be too long today. And I want to go over just a few more formal laws involving communication. There are rules against something we call seditious expression. That's communication that presents a clear and present danger, like shouting fire in a movie theater and creating a mass panic where people could be injured and scared and things like that. Or communication considered to create a danger to national security. For instance, you can't say, hey, the troops are going to arrive on this beach at this morning at this time, because that might tip off our enemies and hurt our troops and ultimately hurt us. Now, if the government determines that the communication is posing a clear and present danger, then the government is supposed to be able to use what's called a prior restraint. And that defined is when the government prevents or blocks the publication, the broadcasting, the showing, or distribution of media content, whether in print, over the air, or in movie theaters. It must be used only in cases of serious or grave threats to national security. Now again, like we were saying with obscenity, this regulation is not as easy as it sounds. It's proven difficult in the past to invoke the national security justification. One of the most famous cases of an unsuccessful attempt to stop publication by using the clear and present danger argument involved what is known as the Pentagon Papers, which kind of took place in 1971. They involved Daniel Ellsberg. He was a high-level Pentagon official and Vietnam War strategist. And he had watched the Vietnam conflict very carefully, both in Vietnam and from the U.S. perspective, and he came to be disillusioned about the U.S. plans for the conflict, and he felt like high-level officials were lying to the American public. Now, Ellsberg had access to high-level, top-secret documents on Vietnam policy that would reveal what he considered problems with U.S. plans, including what he believed to be lies that officials had been telling. Ellsberg eventually leaked 7,000 pages of these documents to the New York Times and the Washington Post. Let me show you. This is I know you've probably heard of the movie The Post, which deals with the Washington Post's release of this information. But this was the introduction to a documentary called The Most Dangerous Man in America, Daniel Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers. So you kind of get a sense of what was going on.
It was the evening of October 1st, 1969, when I first smuggled several hundred pages of top-secret documents out of my safe at the Rand Corporation. The study contained 47 volumes, 7,000 pages. My plan was to Xerox the study and reveal the secret history of the Vietnam War to the American people.
The FBI was trying to find out who gave the New York Times a copy of the Pentagon's secret study.
Pow, like a thunderclap, you get the New York Times publishing the Pentagon Papers, and the country is panicking.
This is an attack on the whole integrity of government. If whole file cabinets can be stolen and then made available to the press, you can't have orderly government anymore.
A name has now come out as the possible source of the Times Pentagon documents. It is that of Daniel Ellsberg, the top policy analyst for the Defense and State Departments.
I think it is time in this country to quit making national heroes out of those who steal secrets and publish them in the newspaper.
In the first year of marriage, we're talking about him going to prison for the rest of his life.
Now, girls, forgive me, concerned about the possibility of going to prison for this?
We haven't a
Wouldn't you go to prison to tell son this war?
We felt so strongly that we were dealing with a national security crisis. Henry Kissinger said that Dr. Daniel Ellsberg was the most dangerous man in America, and he had to be stopped.
So there's Ellsberg on the right. Like I said, he was an official, a U.S. official, a strategist located in Vietnam. And he did leak those 7,000 pages of secret documents to the Times and to the Washington Post. Now, the Nixon administration first orders that the New York Times cease publication immediately. At first, the New York Times refuses, and the administration goes to court to block publication further publications citing clear and present danger. And eventually the Times did kind of back down. But the Washington Post came forward and they started to publish those papers. The administration said they were worried about national security. They feared that publication of the papers would impede the war effort. Now, historians today argue that the real reason the administration did not want the report published was because it detailed the U.S. government's massive problems with the Vietnam conflict. For example, they say the U.S. government knew early on that the war would not likely be won and that continuing it would lead to many times more casualties than they were admitting publicly, at least. The Supreme Court then eventually sided with the New York Times and their right to publish, and this ultimately leads to Watergate, Nixon's resignation, the resignation of the President of the United States, and really the end of the Vietnam War. And historians have concluded that the significance of the Pentagon Papers case made it really perhaps the most important and famous test of the freedom of press from arbitrary censorship by the government in the name of protecting national security. Some compare the Ellsberg case to that of Julian Assange, who's the founder of something called WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks is a whistleblowing website that became the focus of a global debate that really continues to this day. Its founder, Julian Assange, starting in late 2010, started releasing thousands of confidential messages about wars that the U.S. was involved with in Iraq and Afghanistan, including field reports, which also included the number of actual casualties of Americans and enemy combatants and civilians on the ground. The conduct of American diplomacy around the world was being released, including many thousands of U.S. confidential and classified documents that went back decades. That told of things like, spying by U.S. officials on their allies in other countries and ignoring human rights abuses in those other countries. The United States lobbying around the world was released, to help American corporations to win contracts. So they were revealing, all the negotiations that the United States was involved with, something that had never been revealed before. Now, the mission of WikiLeaks is to gather and reveal secret and little-known information about governments and corporations. They get a lot of information from whistleblowers, insiders, and institutions. And so that's really what they've been doing. And they chased after Assange and charged him with a variety of things. In fact, a number of countries have done this. And to this day, at least at the time of this recording, he is holed up in London in the Ecuadorian embassy, which has granted him political asylum, but he's been stuck there since June of 2012. He's not been able to leave. And he's really not the only one. You also know the case of Edward Snowden, the former U.S. CIA NSA employee who leaked U.S. and English mass surveillance program information to the press. And really, it was another significant leak. And people are really struggling with this. I mean, are they heroes, sort of living the dream of the First Amendment and sharing all the information that's possible to be shared? Or are they villains in some way hurting the national security of the United States? You really have to decide for yourself. Okay, that's the end of Regulation, Part 4.